The client's voice cut through the conference room like a blade, demanding revisions on our campaign mock-up, and my carefully constructed pitch unraveled in an instant. Sweat beaded at my temples as I fumbled the tablet, the screen flickering under my trembling fingers, exposing every flaw in the design I'd poured weeks into. Then the door swung open and she entered. Emma, the new rival transfer, her presence slicing the tension sharper than any critique. Heads turned, the room's air thickened with unspoken challenge. In this cutthroat creative studio, where ideas clashed like egos in a storm, my professional survival hung by a thread, vulnerability cracking open like fault lines under pressure. Her unreadable gaze locked onto mine, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. The studio hummed with the relentless pulse of creativity, a sprawling loft space in downtown where whiteboards sprawled across exposed brick walls, covered in frantic sketches and color-coded post-its that mapped out campaigns born from sleepless nights. Desks clustered in open pods, fostering collaboration that often devolved into territorial skirmishes, egos flaring over whose concept deserved the spotlight. The air carried the faint tang of fresh coffee from the perpetually brewing pot, and the sharper bite of dry erase markers, underscoring the pressure cooker atmosphere where deadlines loomed like storm clouds, and every pitch could make or break a reputation. My days blurred into a ritual of controlled chaos, arriving at dawn to claim my corner desk, surrounded by stacks of mood boards and half-finished digital files that I tweaked obsessively. I thrived on the rhythm, sketching initial concepts in the quiet hours before the team flooded in, then navigating meetings where I'd defend my intuitive designs against the more analytical voices. But beneath the facade of steady competence, insecurities gnawed at me, a quiet erosion from years of watching peers leap to senior roles while I lingered, my career stagnating in the shadow of bolder risks I couldn't quite summon. At 32, with a portfolio that impressed on paper but rarely landed the big accounts, I masked the doubt with polished presentations and late nights alone, convincing myself the next project would be the turning point. That fragile equilibrium shattered the morning Emma arrived, striding into the bullpen like she owned the space, her tailored blazer hugging a frame that moved with deliberate grace. Hired from a rival agency to inject fresh strategy, she disrupted the dynamics immediately. Heads lifted from screens, conversations faltered as she shook hands with the creative director, her voice low and assured, carrying an undercurrent of command that made the room recalibrate around her. She was formidable, mid-30s perhaps, with sharp features framed by dark waves pulled into a loose knot, and an aura that demanded attention without effort. The team buzzed in her wake, speculating on her reputation for dismantling stagnant campaigns, but I felt the shift deeper, a premonition of collision. Our first encounter came during the afternoon huddle, when the director assigned seats for the upcoming client brief. I glanced up from my notes, and there she was, settling into the chair across from mine, her unreadable gaze meeting my eyes with an intensity that pinned me in place. It wasn't hostility exactly, but a subtle power play in the way she held the silence, appraising me as if cataloging every flicker of my expression. "I've seen your work on the eco brand relaunch," she said, her tone smooth, almost complimentary, yet laced with something probing that made my pulse quicken. I nodded, forcing a response about the iterative process, but inside, the encounter lingered, her presence imprinting like an indelible mark. By week's end, the joint project assignment sealed it. We were paired to co-lead the high-stakes beverage campaign, forcing proximity in shared brainstorming sessions that stretched into evenings. The studio's fluorescent hum amplified every rustle of her papers, every tap of her pen, turning the space into an arena of rising tension. I'd catch myself stealing glances, tracing the line of her jaw as she leaned over the table, her scent, subtle vanilla and ink, wafting across the divide, unsettling in its familiarity. In the quiet aftermath of those meetings, my mind wandered to the magnetism of her. an unsettling pull that defied the professional boundaries I'd armored myself with. It wasn't just rivalry. It was the way her gaze lingered, unreadable yet charged, stirring a curiosity I hadn't anticipated, forbidden in its intimacy. The studio walls seemed to close in, echoing my internal ache for something beyond the grind. That late-night preparation session, as rain lashed the windows and the team thinned to shadows, ignited the first spark. A brush of her fingers against mine while passing a marker. Her touch electric, lingering just long enough to blur the lines. The client brief landed like a thunderclap that Monday. A multinational beverage giant demanding a groundbreaking campaign to rebrand their flagship energy drink. Something edgy, viral, that captured the pulse of urban ambition under a brutal 3-week deadline. The stakes were stratospheric. Landing this could catapult the studio into the big leagues. But failure meant layoffs, whispers of which already haunted the break room. Our team huddled in the war room, a glass-walled enclave overlooking the loft, where the creative director paced, barking orders to innovate or perish. I felt the weight settle on my shoulders, my intuitive sketches suddenly feeling inadequate against the clock's relentless tick. Brainstorming sessions devolved into clashes almost immediately. My flow-state ideas, vibrant murals of city nights pulsing with neon energy, colliding against the more structured pitches from others. Elena's voice cut through first, measured and incisive, proposing a layered narrative of personal drive that dissected my concepts with surgical precision. "It's evocative," she said, her gaze fixed on me across the table. "But it needs anchors, moments that ground the chaos." The room nodded. I frayed at the edges, my composure slipping as I defended the emotional core, words tumbling sharper than intended. Heat rose in my chest, not just frustration, but something deeper. Her challenge stirring the air between us into a charged haze. As the session dragged into afternoon, Elena leaned over my sketchpad, her breath warm against my ear. "This line here," she murmured, her voice dropping to a sultry timbre that lingered like smoke. "It's got a raw hunger to it, almost seductive." The compliment blurred the lines, her words wrapping around me, intimate in the sterile conference light. I glanced up, caught in the unreadable depths of her eyes, a flicker of something unspoken passing between us. Admiration, perhaps, or invitation. My pulse stuttered. Professional distance felt paper-thin, her proximity amplifying every shift in the shared workspace, the faint vanilla of her skin mingling with the sharp ozone of printers whirring nearby. We were thrust into a shared corner desk for the review phase, papers and tablets strewn like battlefield remnants, her chair inches from mine. The sensory details assaulted me, the soft rustle of her blouse as she reached for a marker, the subtle warmth radiating from her arm brushing the edge of the table, her scent weaving through the recycled air like an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. It unsettled me, this forced intimacy, turning collaboration into a slow unraveling. I caught myself tracing the elegant curve of her wrist as she annotated a board, the internal ache building, a quiet throb that echoed my deeper vulnerabilities. That ache traced back to the betrayal 3 years prior, when my mentor at the old agency had stolen my lead concept for a luxury watch campaign, pitching it as her own to snag a promotion while I was left scrambling, reputation tarnished in the fallout. The wound festered, a scar of misplaced trust that made every partnership a minefield, every shared idea a risk of exposure. Elena's arrival reopened it, her unreadable gaze probing like she could sense the fracture, making me guard my sketches closer, yet drawn inexorably nearer. By evening, alone with the blank canvas of my solo concept attempt, frustration mounted, the energy drink's essence eluding me, lines jagged and uninspired without the spark of opposition. The studio emptied, shadows lengthening across the loft, but my mind replayed her compliment, sultry and lingering, blurring focus further. I needed input, reluctant as it was. Swallowing pride, I texted her, the plea for collaboration hanging in the digital void, a bridge I couldn't burn. Emma's reply came swiftly that night, a simple affirmation laced with an edge of intrigue. Tomorrow, before the team arrives, we'll salvage this. The studio felt altered when I arrived at dawn, the loft still cloaked in pre-light hush, monitors dormant and the air heavy with the residue of yesterday's coffee grounds. She was already there, silhouetted against the window overlooking the waking city, her fingers drumming a precise rhythm on the table's edge as she reviewed my rough sketches. Our joint sessions began tentatively, the space between us a tentative neutral ground, but they quickly exposed the fault lines in our approaches. My intuitive flow, where ideas spilled like ink in water, clashing against her calculated precision. Each suggestion, a scalpel refining the chaos into something unyielding. We pored over digital mock-ups that first morning. Her critiques delivered in that low, measured cadence that made every word land with deliberate weight. "Your colors bleed too freely here," she observed, leaning in close enough that I caught the subtle warmth of her breath, her finger tracing a line on the screen with unerring accuracy. I pushed back, defending the emotional surge I'd aimed for, the way the gradients mirrored the unpredictable rush of ambition the drink promised. Her unreadable gaze lifted then, holding mine across the table, and in that suspended moment, unspoken longing stirred, a vulnerability I hadn't invited, her eyes mapping the flicker of doubt I tried to conceal. It wasn't judgment, it was something deeper, a recognition that left me exposed, the studio's charged atmosphere amplifying the quiet displacement I felt, as if the very walls shifted to echo the turmoil within. As days blurred into a rhythm of shared revisions, the subtle power dynamic emerged, woven into the fabric of our collaboration. During one extended critique, as I struggled to align my vision with her framework, her hand settled on my shoulder, guiding, not demanding, yet firm enough to send a quiet jolt through me. The touch was professional, meant to steady as she pointed out a structural flaw in the layout, but it lingered, her palm warm against the thin fabric of my blouse, imprinting a heat that radiated long after she withdrew. I processed it internally, the emotional landscape tilting. The studio, once a sanctuary of solitary creation, now felt like a cage for this burgeoning awareness, her presence displacing the careful order I'd maintained. That displacement deepened over mood boards scattered like confessions across the table, vibrant swatches of urban grit and electric blues evoking the campaign's core. We lingered there one afternoon, the team milling distantly in the background, and our eyes met over a particularly evocative image, a shadowed figure mid-leap against a neon skyline. The contact prolonged, her gaze unblinking, drawing me in until the world narrowed to the space between us, charged with the first hint of forbidden desire. It was in the way her lips parted slightly, as if weighing words she chose not to voice, stirring an ache low in my chest, a craving for the intimacy her precision hinted at, but withheld. I pulled back first, heart thudding, masking it with a question about saturation levels, but the pull remained, undeniable. My attempts to maintain distance only backfired, intensifying the proximity we couldn't escape. I'd arrive earlier, claiming the far end of the table, only for her to slide her chair nearer during discussions, her knee brushing mine under the surface in what could have been accident, but felt deliberate. Sultry compliments slipped in amid the feedback. "Your instinct for tension here is almost visceral," she'd murmur, her voice dropping to a timbre that wrapped around the words like silk. each one eroding my resolve further. The studio's hum faded against it, leaving only the rhythm of our exchanges, her calculated poise contrasting my fraying edges, building a tension that hummed beneath every interaction. Then the external crisis hit. Scathing client feedback arrived via email that evening, slashing our initial concepts as derivative and unfocused, demanding a radical overhaul by week's end. The studio buzzed with panic, but in the war room's dim light, Elena's gaze met mine again, resolute. We'd have to rely deeper now. Our partnership, the only anchor in the storm. The client's feedback ignited a frenzy, transforming the studio into a pressure cooker where every hour blurred into the next, the looming presentation date etched into our calendars like a guillotine's shadow. Team scrutiny intensified. Whispers in the break room dissected our progress, the creative director hovering during check-ins with a gaze that dissected flaws before we'd even voiced them. Our joint concept, now a hybrid of my raw energy and Emma's precision, faced relentless revisions. Mock-ups iterated in endless loops, the beverage's rebrand demanding not just visuals, but a narrative that screamed ambition without tipping into cliché. I felt the stakes coil tighter, my role as co-lead magnifying every decision, the fear of public unraveling gnawing deeper as the team watched, waiting for cracks to show. Late nights became our ritual, the loft emptying to skeletal quiet, leaving us alone with the glow of screens and the hum of the ventilation system. During one such session, as we huddled over a refined storyboard, Emma's hand brushed mine while adjusting a digital layer, her fingers lingering on the tablet's edge, warm and steady against my skin. The touch sent jolts through me, unwelcome yet insistent, sharpening my focus to a razor's edge. It wasn't the contact itself, but the way it anchored me amid the chaos. Her presence a tether I hadn't realized I craved. I pulled back slightly, heart thudding, but she didn't withdraw, her palm grazing my wrist as if to steady the tremor she must have sensed. The gesture professional yet laced with an intimacy that blurred the lines further. As we polished the design, a sleek integration of urban pulse and personal drive, Emma's approval came in a sultry whisper, her voice dropping low against the soft whir of the printer. This refinement? It's exquisite. The way you've captured that inner fire without apology. The words wrapped around me, deepening the internal storm. Her breath stirred the fine hairs at my nape, evoking a heat that spread like ink through water, stirring longings I dared not name. I nodded, forcing composure, but inside, the compliment echoed, amplifying the ache, the forbidden pull toward her unreadable depths, where challenge met something softer, more vulnerable. That night, as rain sheeted the windows, my mind drifted to the secret fear I'd buried since art school, when I'd poured my soul into a thesis project only to have it critiqued as overly exposed. The professor's words stripping me bare in front of peers. The vulnerability of creation had always terrified me. The act of bearing ideas, a risk of rejection that mirrored deeper wounds of inadequacy. I'd armored myself since, layering precision over intuition to avoid that raw edge. Emma's probing style reopened it, her gaze seeming to sense the fracture, making every shared revision feel like a confession I wasn't ready to voice. The studio's dim lights casting our shadows as intertwined warnings. Yet, amid the grind, our rivalry softened into a tentative alliance, forged in shared frustrations with the studio's politics. The director's favoritism toward flashier pitches, the endless budget wrangles that stifled bolder risks. We'd vent in hushed tones during coffee runs, her calculated facade cracking just enough to reveal the weariness beneath. Our complaints weaving us closer without admission. They undermine the craft for optics, she'd mutter, stirring her mug with a precision that belied the fire in her eyes. And I'd nod, the common ground easing the tension, turning adversaries into reluctant confidants in the loft's echoing vastness. Conversations deepened in those stolen pauses, unspoken subtext threading through the mundane, her guarded backstory emerging in fragments, like the way she'd pause when discussing past agencies, her voice tightening around mentions of a mentor who promised partnership but delivered isolation. It mirrored my own scars, her words hinting at a betrayal that had honed her unreadable armor. A wall built from professional isolation that now felt achingly familiar. We didn't pry, but the revelations hung between us, charged with recognition. Her gaze softening in those moments, inviting a connection that simmered beneath the surface. As the clock pushed midnight, the team long gone, we found ourselves alone in the studio office, a cramped annex off the main floor, its single window fogged with condensation. The door clicked shut behind us, amplifying the charged silence. Her presence filled the space, the air thick with the residue of our collaboration. Vanilla and ink mingling in the quiet. I met her eyes, the unreadable veil thinning, and felt the pull intensify. A quiet moment that promised everything and nothing. The charged silence in the studio office stretched, heavy with the weight of our unspoken alliance, until Emma broke it with a quiet exhale, her fingers tracing the edge of a forgotten sketch on the desk. We returned to the main floor the next morning, the loft awakening to the clatter of keyboards and murmured greetings. But the imprint of that isolation lingered, a subtle shift in how our eyes met across the crowded space. The try-fail cycles of our collaboration intensified then, each session a delicate balance of push and pull, my bold ideas tested against her unyielding framework in ways that left me both exhilarated and exposed. It started with my presentation of a daring concept during the midweek team review, a visual narrative where the energy drink fueled not just bodies, but dreams, abstract sequences of shadowed figures breaking free from urban cages, rendered in explosive bursts of crimson and electric blue. I stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, sketching the flow with fervent strokes, my voice steady as I outlined the emotional arc, the way it captured ambition's raw edge. The team leaned in, murmurs of interest rippling. But Emma's gaze challenged from her seat, her head tilted in that familiar angle, unreadable yet laced with admiration that flickered like a hidden flame. She didn't interrupt, but when I finished, her slow nod carried a weight, her eyes holding mine longer than necessary, as if she'd seen not just the idea, but the vulnerability poured into it. The approval unsettled me, stirring the internal storm. Her look promised critique, but delivered something warmer, a recognition that made my skin prickle with awareness. As we dissected the pitch afterward in our corner, the accidental brush of her fingers over the shared tablet ignited it further, reaching simultaneously for the stylus, our hands colliding in a tangle of warmth and hesitation. The contact was fleeting, her skin soft against mine, but it simmered into physical awareness that refused to fade, a quiet electricity humming along my nerves long after we separated. I felt it in the way my breath caught, the studio's ambient noise receding to leave only the rhythm of her typing, the subtle shift of her chair drawing us closer. Professional boundaries frayed at the edges. I told myself it was the deadline's pressure, but the truth coiled deeper, her proximity awakening a longing I couldn't compartmentalize, the air between us thickening with every inadvertent near touch. That internal conflict peaked by afternoon, as we iterated on the visuals, my composure threatening to dissolve entirely under the weight of her nearness. I'd catch myself pausing mid-sentence, gaze drifting to the elegant line of her neck as she concentrated, the faint vanilla of her scent weaving through the recycled air like an invitation I dared not accept. The studio felt smaller, its brick walls closing in to amplify the tension. Every adjustment to the design felt personal now, her suggestions not just strategic but intimate, probing the layers I'd hidden beneath polished exteriors. I fought it, redirecting my focus to the screen, but the effort only heightened the processing, thoughts looping in endless circles, admiration twisting into desire, rivalry into a sanctuary I craved yet feared. Emma's compliment came then, layered with an intimacy that unraveled me further. As I refined a keyframe, capturing the drink's essence in a moment of solitary triumph, she leaned back, her voice a sultry murmur that cut through the hum. Your passion here. It's palpable. The way it infuses every line with that unyielding drive. The words carried subtext, her eyes locking onto mine with a depth that suggested she saw more than the work, the fire I'd guarded, now exposed in the creative vulnerability. It wasn't overt, but the timbre of her approval wrapped around me, evoking a heat that spread low and insistent, blurring the professional into something forbidden, her gaze unreadable yet promising a connection that mirrored my own hidden aches. My attempt to redirect those feelings failed spectacularly that evening, as I lingered after the team dispersed, pretending to tweak files while stealing glances at her retreating form. I busied myself with unrelated sketches, forcing distance through isolation, but it only amplified the emotional processing. Solitude brought no relief, only the echo of her touch, her words replaying like a slow burn in the quiet loft. The redirection backfired, drawing me back to our shared space the next day with heightened sensitivity, every interaction laced with the unresolved pull. It was during that late-night confessional exchange, as we reviewed progress under the dim overheads, that mutual vulnerability surfaced. She'd shared a fragment earlier, her voice tightening around a past project's sabotage, the isolation of being the outsider in a boys' club agency. And now, emboldened, I confessed my own scar, the mentor's theft that had left me doubting every alliance. Her gaze softened, the unreadable facade cracking to reveal a shared longing. I know that isolation, she whispered, her hand hovering near mine on the table, not touching, but close enough to bridge the gap. The revelation hung between us, a tentative thread weaving our wounds together, the studio's shadows witnessing the shift from guarded rivals to something achingly real. The impending deadline loomed then, forcing us into an all-nighter that would test every boundary we'd skirted, the clock's tick amplifying the charged air as the city lights flickered beyond the windows. The all-nighter descended like a velvet curtain, the studio's dim lights casting elongated shadows across the loft, turning our corner into an isolated island amid the silent sprawl. Monitors glowed softly, illuminating stacks of printouts and half-empty coffee mugs, the rhythmic cadence of our collaboration emerging in the quiet. My stylus scratching against the tablet in bursts of intuition, Emma's keyboard clicks a steady counterpoint, precise and unhurried. We moved in sync now, ideas flowing without the earlier friction, her suggestions weaving seamlessly into my sketches, the beverage campaign evolving into a tapestry of urban drive and quiet revelation. The hours blurred, punctuated only by the distant hum of the city below, her presence a constant hum in the periphery, drawing me deeper into the rhythm we'd carved out together. Stress mounted as the clock edged toward dawn, my hands trembling slightly while layering final textures into the digital mock-up, the weight of the deadline pressing like an invisible hand on my shoulder. Emma noticed without a word, her steady hand reaching across the table to cover mine, fingers enveloping the shake with a warmth that grounded me instantly. The touch was firm yet gentle, her palm calloused from years of drafting, holding just long enough to still the tremor, a silent assurance that echoed the vulnerability we'd confessed earlier. I felt the heat seep into my skin, a quiet anchor amid the chaos, her gaze lifting to meet mine in the low light, unreadable but softened at the edges, as if she understood the fear of unraveling without needing to voice it. The contact lingered in my mind long after she withdrew, imprinting a subtle shift. her steadiness becoming the focus I clung to in the haze. As we paused for a breath, the first gray light filtering through the blinds, Emma leaned back, her eyes tracing my form with a sultry observation that cut through the fatigue. "Your intensity tonight," she murmured, voice low and resonant in the quiet. "It's magnetic. The way you chase that elusive edge, unyielding, like you're mapping something sacred." The words drew out hidden longings I'd buried beneath layers of professional armor, her timbre wrapping around me like a caress, evoking the ache of desires unspoken, the forbidden pull toward her that simmered beneath every shared glance. I met her eyes, feeling exposed yet seen, the compliment stirring a warmth that spread through my chest, blurring the line between creative fire and something more personal. Her observation peeling back the facade to reveal the raw drive I'd always guarded. In those isolated hours, I began to map the emotional landscape of Emma's unreadable expressions, deciphering the subtle fissures in her composure, the faint crease between her brows when a concept faltered, the slow curve of her lips when inspiration struck. Each nuance a terrain of guarded depths that mirrored my own internal storms. Her gaze, once a wall, now held flickers of invitation, drawing me into the contours of her restraint, where precision masked a vulnerability that echoed my fears of exposure. The studio's dim confines amplified it, our creative bubble a sanctuary from the outside scrutiny, the rivalry fading into a shared rhythm that felt like refuge, her presence transforming the pressure into a collaborative pulse that steadied rather than shattered. That sanctuary deepened when our backstories intersected further, fragments spilling in the exhaustion's honesty. As we reviewed a pivotal scene in the campaign, a lone figure igniting against the skyline, Emma shared more of her wound, the lost mentorship that had stranded her in a rival agency's shadows, promises of guidance dissolving into isolation that honed her calculated edge. It mirrored my own fears so precisely, the echo of betrayal leaving us both armored against trust. Yet here, in the quiet, it bound us, her voice softening as she admitted the lingering ache of being unseen in her ambition. I nodded, the parallel stirring a profound recognition, our shared scars weaving a thread of intimacy that turned the all-nighter into a confessional space, the dim lights witnesses to the subtle erosion of our walls. By morning, as the team began to trickle in, we ran a successful pitch rehearsal in the empty war room, our voices syncing in a seamless flow, my intuitive flair amplified by her precision, the campaign's narrative landing with a transformative power that left us both breathless. The synergy uncovered something indelible, her gaze locking onto mine at the end with a clarity that promised more, the studio awakening around us as our partnership ignited into uncharted territory. The final presentation day dawned with a relentless edge, the studio thrumming under a pall of anticipation that seeped into every corner, whiteboards wiped clean but scarred with faint ghosts of revisions, the air thick with the scent of fresh printouts and nervous sweat. The team assembled in the war room hours early, running last-minute drills under the creative director's hawkish scrutiny, his voice a whip cracking through the tension, demanding perfection for the beverage giant's executives who arrived like judges in tailored suits. My stomach knotted as I reviewed the slides one final time. The hybrid narrative we'd forged, my raw pulses of urban ambition layered with Elena's precise anchors, now a fragile monument to our nights of synergy, vulnerable to the slightest flaw. The loft felt smaller, walls pressing in with the weight of potential fallout. A botched pitch here could unravel careers, mine most precariously, the stagnation I'd masked now teetering on this edge. When the clients filed in, the room's energy shifted to a taut wire, their expectant gazes scanning the projections as I took the lead, voice steady at first, guiding them through the visuals with practiced poise. But interrogation came swift and merciless, the lead exec leaning forward, his tone dissecting our core motif. The shadowed figures leap into neon, as too abstract, lacking measurable impact. Questions barraged, probing the ROI, the scalability, each one chipping at my facade until my composure cracked publicly, words faltering mid-sentence, the remote slipping from my sweat-slicked palm to clatter against the table. Heat flooded my face, the room's silence amplifying my stuttered recovery, vulnerability spilling out in the flicker of the stalled screen, every eye on me as the internal storm raged, exposing the fracture I'd armored so carefully. The ache of inadequacy surged, old wounds reopening under the scrutiny, my intuitive flow reduced to a trembling halt. Then Emma intervened, her presence a sudden anchor amid the chaos. From her seat beside me, her unreadable gaze locked onto mine, steady and unwavering, cutting through the haze like a lifeline extended in silence. As I groped for words, her hand settled lightly on my forearm under the table, warm, reassuring, fingers pressing just enough to ground the tremor racing through me. The touch restored a desperate focus, her skin against mine a quiet command to breathe, to reclaim the narrative we'd built together, her gaze holding me captive until the fog lifted, words flowing again with borrowed strength. The clients nodded, oblivious to the undercurrent. But in that moment, the realization bloomed sharp and indelible. The ache for Emma's presence as my emotional anchor, her steadiness not just professional but profound, a sanctuary I'd come to crave in the vulnerability of creation. Her touch imprinting a heat that lingered like a promise amid the unraveling. The pitch concluded in cautious approval, the execs filing out with handshakes and murmurs of promising, leaving the war room in a hush, broken only by the director's relieved exhale. But the adrenaline ebbed into a quiet confrontation as the team dispersed. Emma and I lingering amid the scattered notes, the door clicking shut behind the last colleague. She turned to me then, her expression fracturing the unreadable veil, eyes searching mine with a raw intensity that mirrored my own disarray. "You held it together," she said softly, stepping closer, the space between us charged with the residue of the crisis. "But I saw the storm in you, that moment when it nearly broke." Her words exposed our vulnerabilities, mine in the public crack, hers in the subtle tremor of her voice, admitting the fear she'd masked during her own past pitches, the isolation of standing alone under fire. We stood there, the studio's hum fading to a distant pulse, confessions threading between us like fragile bridges over the chasm of our guarded selves. In the aftermath, as her gaze lingered, the forbidden desire surfaced through a charged compliment, her voice dropping to that sultry timbre that unraveled me. "The way you fight for your vision, even when it trembles, it's intoxicating, a fire that draws everything into its orbit." The words hung heavy, her proximity amplifying the pull, eyes tracing my face with a depth that spoke of unspoken longings, the air thickening with the magnetism we'd skirted for weeks. I felt it coil low, a yearning for the intimacy her precision veiled. Her compliment not just praise, but an invitation to the vulnerability we shared. Solitude forced the confrontation then, the loft emptying to echoes as evening fell, leaving me alone with the undeniable pull. Her absence now a void that echoed the anchor I'd lost, compelling me to face the desire blooming unchecked. The studio's solitude wrapped around me like a shroud, the loft's vast emptiness amplifying the echo of my footsteps as I wandered back to our shared corner. The screen's dark now, their glow extinguished like the fragile composure I'd clung to all day. I sank into my chair, the leather creaking under my weight, and confronted the internal turmoil head-on, staring at the scattered remnants of our campaign, printouts curling at the edges, a forgotten stylus bearing the faint imprint of Elena's grip. The presentation's chaos replayed in relentless loops, the crack in my voice, the client's probing stares, and her touch. That steady pressure on my arm that had pulled me from the brink. But it was more than salvation. It was the ache it unearthed. A profound displacement I'd denied for weeks. The unreadable pull of her gaze unraveling the walls I'd built against vulnerability. My reflection stared back from the darkened window, eyes shadowed with the weight of unspoken longing. The creative sanctuary now a mirror to the storm within. Ambition twisted into desire. Rivalry into a craving that threatened to consume the professional self I'd armored so meticulously. I traced the edge of a mood board, fingers lingering where hers had been. The vanilla residue faint but insistent, stirring the forbidden magnetism that had simmered beneath every glance, every brush. Time stretched, heavy and charged, until the distant click of the door shattered the hush. Emma arrived then, her silhouette emerging from the shadows of the hallway, deliberate steps bridging the space between us with an intimate proximity that made the air thicken anew. She paused at the threshold, coat draped over one arm, her dark waves loosened from the day's knot, framing features softened by the dim emergency lights. No words at first. She simply crossed the room, her presence filling the void like a tide reclaiming shore, stopping inches away, close enough that I caught the subtle warmth radiating from her, the faint ink and vanilla aura that had haunted my thoughts. Her eyes met mine, unreadable no longer, a veil lifting to reveal depths I'd only glimpsed in fragments, the guarded precision yielding to something raw and unguarded. I rose slowly, the chair scraping against the floor, our breaths sinking in the charged silence. Her proximity a deliberate choice that eroded the last barriers, turning the studio's expanse into an intimate confessional. The exchange of truths began haltingly, her voice low and resonant as she set her coat aside, fingers brushing the table's edge near mine. "That moment today," she murmured, gaze unwavering, "when you faltered, it wasn't weakness. It was the fire I've watched you contain, the same one that's drawn me in despite every rule screaming to stay distant." Her admission dissolved the facade, the unreadable armor cracking to expose shared longing. She confessed the isolation that had shaped her, the mentorship's betrayal leaving her adrift in agencies where trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, her calculated edge a shield against the vulnerability of creation. I echoed it, words spilling like ink from a tipped vial, the scar of my stolen concept, the fear of exposure that had stagnated my path, how her challenges had both terrified and ignited me, stirring desires I'd buried under layers of professional restraint. The truths wove between us, subtext surfacing in the pauses, her eyes tracing my face with a hunger that mirrored my own, the studio's brick walls absorbing our confessions like silent witnesses to the slow erosion of rivalry into revelation. Then came the touching moment, her hand extending across the divide, palm upturned in quiet invitation. I met it halfway, our fingers clasping with a deliberate slowness that sealed the slow burn ignition, skin warm and yielding, the contact electric yet tender, grounding the storm into something profound. Her thumb traced a subtle arc against my knuckles, not demanding, but anchoring, the gesture evoking a heat that spread vein deep, her gaze locking with mine in shared intensity, the unyielding pull finally acknowledged without words. It wasn't conquest, it was surrender, mutual and aching. Her touch a bridge over the chasm of our guarded selves. The emotional payoff bloomed in that clasp. Focus found not in isolation, but in the mutual vulnerability we unveiled. Her steadiness complementing my fire, desire transforming the ache into clarity, a sanctuary forged from the ruins of our rivalry. The studio stood as witness, its cluttered desks and shadowed corners framing our evolving connection. The campaign's mock-ups scattered like petals from a bloomed tension, promising a partnership beyond professional bounds, where longing found expression in subtle glances and shared silences. In the forward glimpse, as her fingers tightened briefly before releasing, I saw it sustained. The craving fulfilled in late nights that blurred into mornings. Our synergy not just creative, but indelible. Her unreadable gaze now a map to the intimacy we'd ignited. The studio's pulse beating in rhythm with our own. The clasp of our hands lingered in the dim studio, a quiet seal on the revelations we'd traded. But as the night deepened, the aftermath unfolded in subtle waves, strengthening the bond we'd forged not just in creativity, but in the raw exposure of our scars. Days blurred into a new rhythm at the loft. Our collaboration seamless now. The beverage campaign's final approvals flowing through without the earlier friction. My intuitive strokes amplified by her precise refinements. Pitches landing with a synergy that drew nods from the director and murmurs of envy from the team. Yet it was the unspoken shifts that anchored me. The way she'd slide a revised file across the desk with a glance that held layers of the intimacy we'd unlocked. Her presence no longer a challenge, but a steady current, weaving our professional paths into something unbreakable. The studio, once a battlefield of egos, transformed into shared territory. Our corner desk a quiet testament to the partnership born from vulnerability, where ideas exchanged hands with the same deliberate warmth as that first touch. In stolen pauses between meetings, Emma's subtle, sultry affirmation came unbidden, her voice dropping to that resonant timbre as we reviewed the campaign's rollout strategy. "You've given this fire a form I couldn't alone," she murmured one afternoon, leaning close over the printouts, her breath stirring the air between us, eyes tracing the lines of my latest adjustment with an intensity that cements the focus I'd desperately craved. The words wrapped around the ache I'd carried, her approval not just professional, but profound, evoking a heat that settled deep, affirming the longing her gaze had stirred from the start. It wasn't overt declaration. It was in the way her fingers brushed mine while pointing to a detail, lingering just enough to echo the clasp in the empty loft, turning every interaction into a reaffirmation of the connection we'd ignited. I felt it coil through me, the unreadable depths now a map to mutual desire, her presence the anchor that steadied my internal storms, transforming rivalry into a sanctuary where vulnerability bloomed without fear. That internal peace settled gradually, the emotional landscape we'd mapped together becoming a refuge amid the studio's relentless pulse. Late evenings found us lingering after the team dispersed, not always working, but simply existing in the quiet. Her sharing fragments of a new concept over cooling coffee, me sketching idle responses that captured her essence in abstract curves and shadowed forms. The air carried her vanilla scent, mingled with the faint ozone of screens, a sensory reminder of the intimacy we'd built, the brick walls absorbing our low conversations like confidants. No longer did insecurities gnaw at the edges. Her unwavering gaze resolved them. Each look, a subtle promise that the exposure we'd risked had yielded something indelible. A focus sharpened by her precision against my fire. The ache of past betrayals faded, replaced by this profound clarity where professional survival intertwined with personal revelation. Her touch, accidental or not, grounding me in a way that made the grind feel like purpose. The final image etched itself in the creative world's sprawl. Our paths intertwined now, visible in the campaign's launch, billboards pulsing with our hybrid vision across the city skyline, a testament to the synergy that had bridged our worlds. We'd stand together at the reveal event, her hand at the small of my back in a gesture hidden from the crowd, her eyes meeting mine amid the flash of cameras, unreadable to others, but laden with the shared longing that had carried us here. Future tensions teased at the horizon, upcoming projects with tighter deadlines, the studio's politics ever shifting. But they resolved in her gaze, steady and inviting, a quiet assurance that whatever storms arose, we'd navigate them clasped in this evolved connection, the slow burn sustaining into an enduring flame. The door to the studio clicked shut behind us that night, sealing old pressures in the past as new beginnings stretched ahead. If this slow burn ignited something in you, subscribe for more Sapphic legacies that map the heart's uncharted depths.